Okay, great. Okay, over to you, Jaco.
Good evening, everyone. We have the pleasure of welcoming Dr. Emilio Mordini to our CTA meeting tonight. Dr. Mordini is a clinical psychoanalyst based in San Vito al Tagliamento in Italy. He is the scientific director of Noria, a non-profit organization which promotes and investigates ethics, culture, and identity. He has a background in medicine and philosophy, and he has extensive research and teaching credentials. He's also a scientific expert at various ministries and commissions. So as usual, Dr. Mordini will give us a talk of approximately 30 minutes. And afterwards, we will engage him with comments and questions. And we're really looking forward to that. So the title of his talk is, Where Do We Come From? Who Are We? And Where Are We Going? Thank you, Emilio.
Thank you, Jaco, for your introduction, and hello to everybody. I'm less crazy than you can imagine. The title is the title of a painting by Paul Gauguin, who made it in 1876, shortly before his suicide attempt. I hope this is not a prediction of what I'm going to do, even if it was December for Gauguin. But it was a big picture that Gauguin tried to provide about life. So I must tell you, one of the reasons I accepted your kind invitation was not only for the pleasure to know you, to meet you, but also because it gave me an opportunity to start a job. I know for a long time I must do, but I have been postponing till now, partly out of fear and partly out of laziness. You have in fact invited me to speak on something around which I've been reasoning for about 40 years. It is since the first moment when I started along the profession of psychoanalysis. It is something we've been circling around all my life as a psychoanalyst. I've given too many lectures, too many university courses about this issue, and I thought about it too little. Now, I used to live in Rome, then in Paris. Now I'm in a little town in the Venetian countryside. And I have time to reflect, to think. And I finally realized that in 40 years, I've never understood anything. And I would like to go back to my 20s, to start again, to study all the things I studied without understanding them, to listen again the words of my masters, whose meaning escaped me then. So I told you this because I want that you understand that my speech will be fragmentary. Sometimes will be also even incomprehensible, not coherent. So I will speak to you about my doubts, my questions, my unsolved problems, and that's it. We will think together. So let's start with the gender theories, because I'm focusing on gender, but from gender we enlarge the picture. Let's speak of the gender theories, and they affirm something which is true. No real lie is ever completely false. The most cunning deceptions are a mix of truth and falsehood. And gender theories affirm something which any psychotherapist knows very well, which is the elusiveness of personal identities. Each human being is like a Pirandello short story. You are one, no one, and 100,000. Right? We are one, no one, and 100,000. So at the end of the day, we run the risk that the people who context dispute in some way the rightness of gender theories run the risk to find themselves accumulated with pre-psychoanalytical and positivist culture, unaware of the complexity of human spirit. And paradoxically, those who advocate cancel culture becomes the heirs of the richest and deepest tradition of Western thought. Sexual identities, gender identity, is part of the personal identity. And personal identity is the state of being the same, which is identity. What does it mean, identity? It means sameness. Two items are identical if A is the same of B. But you can immediately perceive that is an impossible statement, because if A is exactly the same of B, it means that there are no A and B. There are no two items, but there is only one item. As a matter of fact, any identity statement, including personal identity, is a false statement. In the sense that you thought that there were two, but actually there is one. And rigorously speaking, only God has an identity, because only God is always the same, independently of contingency and time. Any living being which is in time, who is in time, in the ceaseless flow of time, cannot be identical, is changing. Is continuous, is an ongoing modification. Of course, we can decide, we can operationally, and this is what we do, operationally decide there are some qualities, some attributes which are stable enough to be considered, for practical reasons, permanent or essential. And we ground the notion of identity on these elements. It is a fiction, but it is a helpful, a necessary fiction. In the Western culture, there are three elements we have decided are foundational. And they were, for the first time, told by the pre-Socratic philosopher Thales. And his statement is probably the last politically correct statement of the whole history of the Western thought. Thales told, it was said to tell, that he was grateful to fortune for these three things. First, that he was born a human and not a beast. Then he was born a man and not a woman. And third, that he was born a Greek and not a barbarian. To tell something similar today, they can kill you. But be warned, Greeks were not neo-Nazis. Think, that culture which completely agreed with Thales' statement, all Greeks could tell you something similar as the Thales statement. But that culture was the culture in which we find in the foundational books of this culture, the Iliad and the Odyssey, we found the most poignant and profound description of animals that still remain with us today. The horses, Achilles' horses in the Iliad, and the dog, Odysseus' dog, in the Odyssey. And that culture that gave thanks for being male and not female was the culture that described women with the death never seen again later in the West. Think of Antigone, Medea, Clytemnestra, Eurydice, Ariadne, and so many others. Finally, that culture that gave thanks for being Greeks and not barbarians was the culture who wrote as its first theatrical text. Does think this means the first theatrical text in the history of the West? The first theatrical text was the Persians by Aeschylus, which speaks of barbarians and moreover of mortal enemies of Greeks, and speaks of them with a richness of spirit and humanity that we ignore today when we speak of our enemies. So this was Greek culture. And you should, if not completely understand, but at least feel what I told you now. Otherwise, you can't probably completely get my conclusions. Okay, so I told you that personal identity is based on characteristics, on features that must be stable enough to ensure some continuity. And these characteristics, these features in the West have been identified as species, gender, and culture. These three rocks. On these rocks, there is a river of sensations, memories, fantasies, emotion, identification, which flows. And our minds are like a stage where we play all the roles, not only when we dream, but always. The living being is at its deepest structure relational. Imagine a graph in the shape of a sphere, an infinite sphere. Each of us exists as a node, a vertex of a number of links, of arcs between other nodes in the graph. Does the node exist? Yes, it exists, of course. But would it exist if there were no arcs, no links? No. Arcs and nodes are the terms of the same reality. They cannot be thought of independently of each other, like the angles of the triangle. The angles of the triangle, they exist, but if there are not, if there is not a perimeter, if there are not lines, there are not links, what are angles? They do not exist. The relations is everything. The relation creates the nodes. So each individual emerges as a node from an almost infinite number of relationships within other nodes. Our minds, is not in our brain. Our minds is between us. The brain are the point of the triangle, but the triangle is made up by the three sides. Okay? So, and this makes the continuous flow of identity. But there are three rocks which are maybe only fantasized, but the West invented these three rocks: the species, the gender, and the culture. And of course, we fantasize also about this. There are many identifications. We can identify with different animals or different species. Think of shamans. We can identify with opposite gender or form of transsexualism, with individual of a different era, a different culture, some delusive disorders. But we can have these fantasies only because we stand on a solid foundation. Otherwise, we would be lost in a labyrinth. There is a splendid poem of an Italian poetry of last century, Ungaretti. He wrote it in the winter in 1916 in Paris. The poet, returning home, found his roommate hanged from the ceiling. And his roommate was a young Arab immigrant whose name was Mohammed Shab. And he wrote this poem. His name was Mohammed Shab, descendant of emirs of nomads, suicide because he no longer had a homeland. He loved France, he changed name, he became Marcel, but he wasn't French. He could not no longer live in the bell tent of his people, where they listened to the sing-song of the Koran, enjoying a coffee. And he couldn't rise the song of his loneliness. I accompanied him together with the landlady of the hotel we lived in to Paris, to number 5 of Rue de Carme, of declining downhill alley. He rests in peace in the cemetery of Ivry, a suburb which seems always to be in a day of the composite fair. And maybe I am the only one who still knows he lived. So Mohammed Shahab forget his identity, and he hung himself exactly for this reason. So sexual identity is one of the rocks of personal identity. And I try to go more rapid. Sexual identity is based on sexual difference, and sexual difference is based on reproduction. Basically, male and female in humans, in mammalians, are defined by the kind of gametes they produce. Female are those individuals who produce bigger gametes, and male are those individuals who produce smaller gametes. This is for every mammalians, and cannot be changed by anything. You are a producer of bigger or smaller gametes, no matter what kind of surgery, of sexual rectification, whatever else you do, you keep on being a producer of bigger or smaller gametes. You keep on being male or female. No alternatives, two. And this is reproduction. So male and female is a reproductive definition. But what is reproduction based on? Human beings are driven to reproduction by a desire called sexual. And Freud called this desire drive, in German, Trieb. The drive is heading toward an object, another person, a fantasy, even oneself, with the aim of achieving satisfaction and calming an internal tension, which can originate from various parts of the body. And sexual drive does not have an obligatory relationship with reproduction. So gender identity and choice of sexual object are related but independent. So we can obviously discuss on male and female different ways to perceiving sexual desire, but I don't want to, we have short time. And the sexual drive grounds on the reproductive function, I told you, but it goes far beyond reproduction and involves many other aspects of life. We must therefore find what explains sexual drive, which cannot be explained only by reproduction. And there is a higher principle. This principle, we call it love. The ancient Greeks called it Eros, and the two words have exactly the same meaning. Word love and Eros. Eros or love is the principle that drives everything that exists to connect. It's the principle that generates the network of relationship through which all individuals emerge. Right? When I explained, we have told you about the fact that we are nodes of a graph. There are links. We exist because there are links. Without links, nodes do not exist. Well, the link which connects the nodes is love, is Eros. Then there is, I cut all part of my speech which concern attachment, because now we can speak of attachment, which is the biological basis of love. but skip it. We have now another question. On what is love based? Because attachment theory, biological theories provide a description, not a justification, a foundation. Okay, Freud and many scientists, even today, gave the answers that the only explanation is natural selection. As a matter of fact, being able to love is provide a reproductive benefit, a reproductive advantage. Ancient Greeks, the Jewish religion, the Christian religion do not need this explanation because they say that God is love in different ways, but these three roots of the West say that God and love are the same item, just so to speak.
With about 5 minutes left, Emilio.
Yes, thanks. As a matter of fact, either love is God or not. As a matter of fact, all human powers either succumb to love by becoming other than themselves, or are forced to fight love as their worst enemy. And this was well understood by Orwell, who concluded his novel 1984 in the most tragic and desperate way: the betrayal between two lovers. So I have a few minutes to conclude my chat, which is about a new normality. The architecture whose design I've just sketched, from reproduction to love, identity, is now what is collapsing under the pressure of the new normal. The shift from the producer citizen to the consumer citizens, and finally to the digital citizen, is bringing about a dramatic anthropological revolution. Ruling classes that have run the world for the past 3 centuries have virtually disappeared. In their places emerged of global class of power holders who derive their wealth from finance and are devoid of even minimal cultural, artistic, literary, humanistic training. Their horizons are those of their adolescence background, a little cheaper science fiction, some technological experience, and not much else. In a similar way, the masses we knew last century disappeared. Today, there is an atomized and dispersed mass of producer consumers who spend their lives in the internet, far from each other, lacking any real connection with each other, mesmerized by constant flow of information, sounds, and images. And this is the anthropological revolution which is taking place. And the new normal is being constructed through 3 distinct but interconnected processes. I'm not going to describe them now, just to announce the list. The first is the eradication of identity, gender identity, cultural identity, and even species identity. I'm involved since the beginning of the 19th. I've been involved in the European Commission ethical review of research projects. In practice, I'm one of the people who gave the green light, to research projects after they have been awarded by a grant. So the ethical check is the last step. Well, I tell you, in almost 40 years, 30 years, 30 years, I've been involved in this exercise. I've seen increase year by year, little by little, all kind of protection for laboratory mice, and decrease all kind of protection for children involved in clinical trials. So even the rock of species is in progress to be eradicated. So the eradication of the three rocks which provide a foundation to identity, and which provide a foundation also to fluidity of identity. The second process concerns bodies and sexuality, the materialization of bodies, the sexualization of life. We have in a society which is sexualized, being desexualized, is a frigid pornography society. And the third process is the building of a new normal through feminization and adolescentization, transforming all people in adolescents, in younger people, and in female, in women. The woman and the adolescents as a symbol of lack, the empty belly, which cannot be filled by any reproductive technology, and the immature body, which go from teenagers to elderly people without passing through maturity, through adulthood. And these bodies becomes inevitably ugly to acquire some texture, some weight. They become deformed by cosmetic surgery, inflated by drugs and supplements, covered by tattoos, changed by surgery. And the ugliness of bodies generates ugliness involving everything, and then return to bodies, creating a vicious circle. And we live in a world in which music is increasing ugly and sloppy. Theater direction is increasing grotesque. Furnishing are vulgar. Clothes are in synthetic fabrics. Vegetables are tasteless, and so on and so on and so on. The ugliness. We live in a world dominated by ugliness and vulgarity. So, to conclude, I think that very little can be done to reverse this trend. historical and social and economical process transcend individuals. And the experience shows that the witnessing of individuals and the ability to preserve culture and memory of the past are more useful than many political efforts. The more I become older, the less I'm confident in politics. In his last poem that he wrote a few months before being killed, Pasolini repeated 3 times a line. And I would like to close my little talk with this line: defend, preserve, pray, and be silent. Well, I have already spoken too much, and now I'm silent. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Emilio. Thank you very, very much. Gosh, what a rich talk. Thank you so much. So, it is now up to our attendees to make a comment. You're welcome to make use of the raise hand icon. And then Val will identify the person who needs to answer or to ask the question.
You'll come up in a row if you use the raised hand. So great. Okay. So
good. Yes.
Can you see the raised hand as well, Jakub?
I can actually. I can.
Okay, great. So I'll leave that with
I'll
leave that with you. We've
Thanks,
got Mary and
right.
Michael.
So we have about 25 minutes to make comments and to ask questions. Mary, you're welcome.
Hello, thank you. That talk was wonderful. It was like a poem. I will come back to it. I think one of the things that really struck me about I mean, I love the three things coming back to them, and the poetry of it, and the flow of life, and identity changing, and things, you know, the constancy. And I think one of the things that feels so tragic around this whole strange oh, where have I gone?
You're still with us.
Oh, I can't see myself. Something happened there. Oh no, sorry, something just.
You're still around.
Oh, there I am. I'm still around.
You've moved around on the screen, Mary, but you're still with us.
Well, I just disappeared. So yes, it's the thing that things have become, on one hand, really disembodied, but then really focused in the body, so that the children are sort of, it's like this strange sort of life online, but actually then things can't be thought about or symbolized or flowed through. It becomes really concretized and located in the body. So these sort of dreadful, the sort of mutilation and the hormones become this kind of, replace the kind of Eros or something. And it feels so, just something about that really dawned on me, because obviously we're not staying in the realm of the symbolic, we're becoming too solid.
Yes, you got perfectly my point. It is, to me, it is extremely important, the metaphor I gave you of the nodes and the links between the different nodes of a graph. Because the body is an essential part, but it is nothing if it is not the relation, and the relation is love, is Eros. The body without relation is a corpse. So in some way, the transhumanism utopia or dystopia is transforming people in corpses before they die. And this is the reason why bodies are so horrible today. And if you look at the movie of the 50s of last century, the faces are different, the bodies are different, the wrinkles are different, the hands are different. And you can feel something similar if you look at the people in African people. They are still, they still feel, you have a feeling of something old looking at them. There are real face, real human face. But if you look today, all people who are in the social, young people, actors, actresses, influencers, and so they're plastic bodies. And this is a coherence behind this, because it is exactly this process. Because look, each one of you, of us, who made the experience in her life, in his life, to fall in love, even for 5 minutes. You don't need to fall in love for a life. It is enough, 5 minutes. You can fall in love with a woman, a man, or even with a dog or a cat or a flower. I don't know, but fall in love for 5 minutes, really fall in love. For that 5 minutes, you don't need anything else. This is the basic test. If you are in love, you don't need to drink, you don't need to eat, you don't need you are happy. That's it. For 5 minutes, you're happy. But are you a good consumer? If you are happy, you are the awful, the most terrible consumer. To consume, you must be always unsatisfied. You must feel a lack. And this is the reason why love, Eros, must be eradicated by this society, from this society. Because this society is based on a sort of bulimia. Consuming, because the economy is that this is a kind of economy cannot be stopped. You can understand the wars, epidemics. If you don't understand, then this economy must continuously go ahead, because it is a Ponzi scheme, basically. If it stops, it collapses. In a Ponzi scheme, you cannot stop. And we are living in a Ponzi scheme society.
Sure, that's profound, yeah. Thank you, Emilio. Then we have Michael and then Ben. Thanks, Michael.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Emilio. It's a wonderful talk. I've been writing a huge list of notes as you've been speaking, and something that occurred to me while you were talking was this notion of society or of as culture as being a negotiation space for one's identity and one's place within their context. And with the advent of things like the internet, as people can go to other cultural contexts simply by going online, it seems to me that that negotiation is over for a lot of people, and that one can simply run to a context where they will be affirmed for whatever identity they're choosing, without any pressures of their society left. In fact, so much so that if they were to make the argument that their society was oppressing them into an identity, they can completely avoid that. And so on the one hand, I see a lot of this argument that our societies, our contexts are forcing us to be constrained. And on the other hand, those same people making that argument can absolutely run away from that pressure. And I was just wondering what your thoughts were on that.
Yes.
Small question, I know.
Your question is everything but an easy question. Okay, I understand very well what you said. But actually, there is always a gap.
Mm-hmm.
And if there were not the gap, doesn't make sense to cure people. Mm-hmm. If I have the patience, it's because I'm confident that my master, the person who taught me psychoanalysis, was also a music composer. And always, he used to tell, in each human being, there is always Mozart music.
Mm-hmm.
You must find it. Sometimes there are a lot of shit on the music. But it is a sort of faith. You have not a scientific demonstration, but you take as a postulate that in all human beings, there is Mozart music. And you have to find it if you are a good therapist. This is the bet and the challenge. But pay attention. Be careful. If you are a believer, there is also theological demonstration of this. Because if you are in relation with God somehow, it means, and if it is true what I told you, that we are in the relation. We are not individuals. We are in the mid between the nodes, the angles. But it means that we are made also by God, because we are made by the relation with God. It means that something within us is divine. You can tell it by saying that it is Mozart music. It's the same concept, told in a more theological format.
Thank you, Emilio. Ben.
Thanks, Emilio. Very interesting talk. Lots of different angles. I find it quite hard sometimes I feel like my brain's going 1,000 ticks a minute. It's hard to keep all the different strands in one's mind at the same time, I think. I was struck by your comments about politics, because I tend to agree with you. I was a very political young man. I was a left-winger in those days. And I thought that, I suppose politics was a substitute for religion. I thought it was going to bring some sort of promised land. And actually, I don't think that anymore. I think politics is probably a zone of inquiry and activity that is fundamentally reductive, reduces the human spirit, reduces capacity for complexity and nuance. And yet, it seems to me it's also the space in which people, or at least a space in which people can express disquiet. So I was wondering, I would connect what you're talking about with the populist insurrection, perhaps, that we're seeing in Europe and the United States, people being inclined to vote for parties of the populist right. You indeed have a new, you've got Giorgia Meloni in Italy now. I'd be interested in your views on what she represents, if she represents something different, or if she's a different face on the same trends. Not that I think divisions of left and right are necessarily that useful, because in a sense what we're talking about is a dissolving of bonds, I suppose. On the left, the dissolving of bonds of understanding and tradition that you're talking about, gender, culture. But on the right, I suppose capitalism, the creation of consumer units where there were citizens and families, I think does the same thing, perhaps from a different angle. I'm not sure there are any kind of, I'm not sure, politics, I suppose, is the idea that it's going to offer you a solution. Here's the solution. It seems to me that there isn't necessarily a solution, but I am interested. I do feel there is a sort of spiritual reawakening, a sort of political pushing back, which I think largely gets kind of typified as being racist and conspiracy theoretical, backwards, knuckle dragging. But actually, I feel anyway, that there is a kind of sense in which many of us feel that we are being invited to dissolve too much, perhaps, that actually the idea that we're all the same, the brotherhood of man, perhaps takes away from the idea of genuine brotherhood with your neighbor, with people who live in your community, your shared, people with whom you have a shared culture, and dare I say it, a shared race. What does it mean to be a Briton or an Italian? I don't have any answers. I'm waffling. I wonder what your thoughts are on the kind of interesting political times in which we live.
Ben, I understand you, and to give you an answer would require, I'm not able to give you an answer, and in any case, even to think together with you about possible answers, or just brainstorming would require probably too time. I tell you a story, a brief story. I cannot, I didn't solve, I tell you that I didn't solve, I didn't find a solution to this story. Some 20 years ago, I had a patient, which was a man about 50s, was a professional, well, I don't remember exactly the kind of, was involved in commerce. We did a lot of things. He was an horrible man. Horrible, frank. I couldn't find Mozart music in him. And but when he became depressed, when he became sad, okay, why we should use always psychiatric and psychological terms? That's horrible habits we have. No, he was sad. When it became sad, there was not Mozart music, but at least some notes, a bit of music, if not Mozart. And but I was paid to cure him. But to cure him was to make him sad. I didn't find the solution, and at a certain moment he gave up. So I solved the problem in such a way, but it remained as an issue I couldn't solve. No, maybe that there is a solution. I know that there is a theoretical solution, but I can tell you from a practical point of view, there was no solution. In theory, yes, there was, but in practice, no. I don't know. This is the problem with politics as well.
Fair.
Thank you, Dan. Emilio, I was thinking about something. The idea of having some stable base, identity base, and from that base, then the freedom to somehow explore some nuances in our relationality. I found that quite a profound comment. And I'm thinking I recently did a refresher course in beyond psychoanalysis, bionic psychoanalysis, Wilfred Bion. And the metaphor of the mother and the infant, where the mother should be sufficiently stable while simultaneously flexible enough to adapt to the needs of the child. Sufficiently stable and flexible, the yin and the yang. And would you say that our culture is being uprooted, is being unmoored with revisionist history, with criminalization of cultures, with the criminalization of certain races even, that there is no stability from which, especially the Gen Z generation, can explore nuances in relationality, that we have these perverse extremes of ugly identities?
Jacob, your question, your comment gives me the opportunity to tell two things I didn't tell you before. The first is more frivolous, but it is an observation which makes sense, which is helpful to do. All those who advocate gender, gay, or whatever else movement are probably those who are more scared by sexual freedom, are more bigot, and cannot put up with the terrible power of sexuality and eros. They are old British oaths. I think that Queen Elizabeth was much more non-bigot than them. First, this is those who speaks of fluid identities are those which are stricter on their
More rigid.
well-grounded identity. They fear, they are afraid, they're scared by the idea of real fluid identity. This is the first point. but this is most frivolous. It's more frivolous. Then there is a more serious point I didn't touch, but I hinted at it. Probably you understood as an undertext of my speech. What is happening today is the attempt to close forever the Greek heritage. Probably historians, the next 20,000 or 10,000 years, will consider the period between Athens and today the same period as we do with Egyptians. Who are Egyptians? They 3,000 of civilization. There are 2 pages in our school book. 3,000 years, 2 pages. And they will devote, historians in the future will devote two pages or our history from Troy War till today to Ukraine War. And they probably said, okay, this was the period of the Greek civilization. And we are at the end of this. They are trying to close this period of human civilization.
Yeah.
And this is the reason why probably the best thing we can do is like when the Roman Empire collapsed, fall. What did the Benedictine monks? They collected books, memories, and created small communities, trying to store culture, history, memories, and then to give them to the next generation.
Yeah,
This is the best we can do, I think.
that's true. Well, that's quite a sobering thought. Yeah.
We have one more questioner, Yaku, if you can see. It's Ella.
Oh, Ella. Sorry, Ella. I didn't even see that. Sorry. That'll be our last question.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much, Emilio. I'm a racial trauma recovery coach, and I speak to a lot of people in their 20s. And the stories that I'm being told are of young people who have had years of schooling and university education, of woke indoctrination, for want of a better term. And they describe symptoms of distress, trauma regarding identity-based abuse. They describe that they've been racially demonized, racially dehumanized, been treated in really the most despicable ways by their educators and by their fellow students for many years. They have various symptoms varying from pulling their hair out, self-harming, drinking, taking drugs, having very promiscuous lifestyles, putting themselves in dangerous situations. But there is a change happening. They are beginning to heal. They're beginning to repair the identity-based abuse that has been happening to them. But I do speak to a lot of people with race-based abuse, but sorry, before my battery cuts me off, I have seen a lot of people healing as well from gender-based abuse. And there is a movement in people in their 20s, the femininity movement and the masculinity movement. I don't know if you've heard about them. There's a YouTuber called Jasmine Theodora and she was a social justice warrior, but now she gives instructions to young women on how to be beautiful, how to have elegance, how to have grace, how to be feminine. And she explains it really well in terms of what her experiences were as a young person going through the femininity abuse and recovering from that and deciding her own identity and claiming her own identity for herself rather than the one that other people would impose on her and want her to be.
Thank you, Ella. But just let me tell you that we probably all suffer from a sort of delusive disorder, professional delusive disorder, which is to believe, or for maybe to illude ourselves, that people can recover only through treatments to us, through us, which is not true. We are tools. Actually, people recover and identities can be reconstructed or invented by I feel unease to use this word because it's a word which has been so badly used. We should invent a new word, but it is love. Love for the world. But love, it's an horrible word. It's a word which makes violence and sweet candies, puppies. I hate that word, but I don't find a different word because, again, you probably understood that I do love Pasolini, and there's a movie, Pasolini movie, that ends with the splendid, which is what are the clouds? And in the end, there are these two puppets. There's two actors, but they pretend being puppets, and then they are thrown away, and they look at the sky, and they spend their life in a theater, in a puppet theater, and then the first time in the rubbish, but the first time they're outside. And one of them look at the sky, see the clouds, and tells, "Oh, what are them?" And the other says, "The clouds." Then there is a pause, a moment of silence, and he asks, "The marvelous, painful beauty of the world, the created world. The marvelous, painful beauty." If we think that beauty and love are violins and birds and pinky things, we are already plastic made. Love and beauty are terrible. are something which should make you scared. It's something that need to fight, are not for pinky souls. You understand what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Thank
this
you
is
very much.
this was perfectly present in all the religions. If you think all the religions were scared by Eros. Eros was not a child with the arrow. No, Cupid was nothing.
Cupid, yeah.
Nothing to do with Cupid. Cupid was an invention of late antiquity.
Thank you, Emilio. Thank you very much. I think from all of us, I think we really thoroughly enjoyed your talk. From my observation, there is still a lot of wisdom that we can glean from you. And I think the rest of us will agree with me that we would love to have you back. We'll talk about that later. For now, thank you very, very much for your generosity and for sharing your wisdom.
Jaco,
Yeah.
Let me tell you that it's me that I thank you. It is difficult to feel the audience when you are online. But this time I have the feeling, I had the feeling.
I told
that,
you.
That we had, that was a good conversation, because sometimes even silent people can tell you a lot. And
Absolutely.
you told me a lot. Thank you.
Great.
It's me that I thank you.
Thank you, Emilio.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. That
You-
brings us to the end of our CTA meeting for this month. We will have